Inside a showroom filled with condescending stares, Samuel Ito, a self-made businessman, walked in with a big dream, owning a plane. But the scornful remarks from Greg Thornton, a haughty salesman, were just the beginning of a powerful showdown where dignity and determination triumphed over prejudice. Morning sunlight streamed through the small window of Samuel Ito's office, illuminating a wall adorned with old photo frames. Each picture told a story: an aging truck on its debut day, a modest celebration marking the company's first anniversary, and a family portrait with Samuel at the center, his weathered face lit by a kind smile. Samuel sat at his desk, his calloused hand brushing over an old business plan. It embodied his life's greatest dream: owning a cargo plane to elevate his company to new heights. Years of saving and relentless determination had brought him closer, nurturing his belief that it was possible. The office door swung open, letting in a burst of fresh energy. Lennox Ito, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, strode in with the confidence of a young attorney. Setting his briefcase down, he looked at his father curiously. "Still looking at that old plan, Dad? I thought you had it memorized by now." Samuel smiled, his eyes gleaming. "Yes, Lennox, but every time I look at it, I find another reason to keep going." Lennox took a seat across from him, his gaze briefly resting on a photograph of their family's first truck purchased with borrowed money. He understood deeply that his father's unwavering work ethic was the foundation of everything they had today. "So, when are we going?" Lennox asked, a note of excitement in his voice. Samuel picked up the phone, glancing at the clock. "Today, we're heading to the showroom in the city. I've already scheduled an appointment. This dream can't wait any longer." The two prepared quickly. Samuel donned a simple but dignified suit, while Lennox pulled their pickup truck around to the front of the office. Though Samuel's old truck was far from pristine, it remained dependable, a reflection of the man who drove it. Arriving at the aircraft showroom, the scene was worlds apart from the simplicity they were used to. Gleaming planes, luxurious interiors, and a sleek, modern space made Lennox feel slightly out of place. Samuel, however, remained composed. "This is the place I've dreamed of," he said, his voice tinged with quiet pride. The two walked through the entrance, but the moment they stepped inside, they felt the weight of judgmental eyes. A middle-aged man in a gray suit, Richard, arched an eyebrow as he observed them. Leaning toward the woman beside him, Judith, he muttered, "Who are they supposed to be? They look more like truck drivers than customers." Judith smirked, her gaze sliding over Samuel and Lennox with thinly veiled disdain. "Do they even know how much these planes cost? What a waste of time." Lennox heard the remarks clearly, his hands clenching into fists. He glanced at his father, waiting for a reaction. But Samuel merely smiled softly, placing a steady hand on Lennox's shoulder and speaking in a low, calming tone. "Stay calm, Lennox. They don't know who we are, but we do, and that's enough." Samuel's words eased Lennox's tension, though the sting of the insult lingered. Together, they ventured deeper into the showroom, where bright lights highlighted each aircraft like a piece of art. A sharply dressed showroom employee approached them, his smile polished but insincere. His eyes flicked over Samuel and Lennox, appraising them as though deciding whether they were worth his time. "Good morning," he greeted, his tone polite but devoid of genuine warmth. "I'm Greg Thornton. How may I assist you today?" Samuel stepped forward, his voice low but courteous. "I'm Samuel Ito. I scheduled an appointment to review a few aircraft models." Greg hesitated briefly, a flicker of doubt crossing his face before he smoothed it over with forced professionalism. "Ah, of course. Please, Mr. Ito, and, your son follow me. I'll give you a quick overview of some of our models." Samuel offered a faint smile and followed Greg's lead. Lennox trailed behind, his eyes scanning the room, noting the stares and whispers. He felt the weight of their assumptions but slowly began to understand his father's approach. Not anger, but patience and quiet confidence. Samuel Ito and Lennox followed Greg Thornton into the main showroom. The polished stone floor gleamed under the bright lights, reflecting the sleek, modern aircraft that lined the space like swans poised for flight. As Greg led them through the aisle, he occasionally glanced back, as though still assessing whether they were truly capable of purchasing one of the planes. Stopping in front of a silver mid-sized jet, Greg gestured with pride. "This is the SRX 200, he said. "One of the most versatile and advanced transport aircraft on the market. Starting price, $4 million. It's ideal for businesses looking to expand their long-range operations." Samuel stepped forward, placing a calloused hand gently on the plane's cool metallic surface. His eyes glimmered with a quiet reverence, as though he were seeing a tangible piece of his dream come to life. Lennox stood beside him, silently observing his father. Greg continued, his tone tinged with condescension. "I must be honest with you, Mr. Ito. Not everyone can afford to buy a plane like this. Many of our clients opt to lease rather than own." Lennox, who had been restraining himself since they arrived, turned to Greg, his frustration evident in his sharp gaze. "And who exactly do you think is qualified to buy it? Are you saying people like us don't meet the standard?" Greg smirked, his smile dripping with mockery. "I didn't mean that, Mr. Lennox. But clearly, the aviation industry requires significant investment, not just in finances but in connections. That's why we're thorough with every transaction." Samuel stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "Greg, I'm fully aware of what the aviation industry requires. I built a transport company from the ground up. What you've mentioned isn't an obstacle for me. What I need are the detailed specifications of this aircraft." Samuel's confidence caused Greg to hesitate for a moment. But instead of backing down, Greg chose to escalate the tension further. His tone grew sharper, more challenging. "Of course, Mr. Ito. But before we proceed, I must ensure that you're financially prepared. A deposit of $500,000 is required to move forward with any agreements. I trust you understand." Lennox stepped closer, his voice taut with frustration. "Are you questioning my father's ability? Or is this how you treat all your clients?" Greg shrugged, his smirk returning. "I'm simply ensuring transparency. It's our policy." The atmosphere thickened with tension. Lennox was about to step forward, but Samuel placed a firm hand on his shoulder, signaling him to stop. Turning to Greg, Samuel's gaze remained steady and unwavering. "Greg, I know what you're thinking. You don't believe someone like me can buy this plane. But that's fine. I've spent my life proving myself through actions, not words." Greg's face reddened slightly, caught off guard by Samuel's composed yet cutting response. Before he could muster a reply, a voice called out from behind them. "Samuel Ito? Is that really you?" Both Samuel and Lennox turned to see Jordan Blake, a longtime friend of Samuel's and now a successful entrepreneur, approaching with a bright smile. Jordan, dressed in an expensive suit, exuded confidence without a trace of arrogance. "Jordan," Samuel greeted, shaking his friend's hand warmly. "I didn't expect to see you here." Jordan glanced around, his eyes quickly picking up on the tension in the air. Turning to Greg, he smiled coolly. "Greg, I can assure you that Mr. Ito is one of the most promising clients you'll ever have. If anyone understands the value of investment, it's him." Greg hesitated, clearly flustered, but tried to recover his professionalism. "Of course, Mr. Blake. I was just walking Mr. Ito through our procedures." Jordan didn't let the excuse linger. Patting Samuel on the shoulder, he said with friendly determination, "Samuel, I know you don't need anyone to vouch for you, but let me handle this. People like us often have to work twice as hard to prove ourselves, but you've always been an example of overcoming every challenge." Samuel smiled, deeply appreciative of Jordan's support. Turning to Lennox, he offered a meaningful look, a silent lesson in resilience. Patience is always the key. The atmosphere in the showroom eased slightly after Jordan Blake's arrival. Greg Thornton, though maintaining a polite facade, couldn't hide his discomfort. Lennox stood beside his father, still visibly displeased. He glanced at Greg as if ready to say something more, but Samuel rested a steady hand on his shoulder and shook his head gently. "Son," Samuel said softly, "staying calm is how we maintain control of the situation. Sometimes, people's actions don't reflect who we are. They reveal who they are." Samuel's words calmed Lennox. He took a deep breath, suppressing the frustration bubbling inside him. Jordan smiled, stepping in to dispel the lingering tension. "Greg, please continue showcasing the product. I'm certain Mr. Ito has some very practical questions." Greg nodded, regaining his professional demeanor. He led Samuel, Lennox, and Jordan to a model plane on display, beginning to explain its features and benefits. However, his voice carried a hint of indifference that didn't escape Samuel's notice. As Greg paused to retrieve additional materials, Lennox leaned toward his father and spoke in a low voice. "Dad, why don't you call him out? It's clear he's not respecting us." Samuel smiled, his expression calm, like the surface of a tranquil lake. "Lennox, what he thinks doesn't matter. What matters is that we know why we're here. If you let your emotions take over, you've already handed them control of the narrative. We need to keep the focus where it belongs, on our goal." Lennox fell silent, but respect for his father swelled within him. He realized that Samuel was not only a successful businessman, but also a man who overcame adversity with patience and wisdom. When Greg returned, he handed Samuel a detailed brochure about the aircraft. "Here's specific information about the models we have. If Mr. Ito requires further details or assistance, I'm at your disposal." Samuel accepted the brochure with a nod of thanks. Flipping through a few pages, he pointed to a section and asked Greg about the plane's cargo capabilities in adverse weather conditions. The question caught Greg slightly off guard. "Oh, that's an excellent question," Greg replied, quickly regaining his composure. "The SRX-200 is designed to perform well in complex weather conditions. However, its performance also depends on proper maintenance and the skill of the crew." Samuel nodded and continued with a series of specific questions, covering maintenance costs, after-sale support, and operational efficiency. With each inquiry, Samuel's deep knowledge and practical experience became evident, leaving Greg with little room for doubt. Jordan stood nearby, watching with a satisfied smile. "Samuel, you never cease to amaze me. You don't just know how to build a business, you know how to run it at every level." Samuel responded with a modest smile. "Jordan, success isn't about owning the best. It's about understanding what you have and using it wisely." Meanwhile, Lennox observed his father with newfound admiration. Samuel didn't need to respond to disrespect with anger. His knowledge and confidence spoke volumes. When the presentation concluded, Greg bid them farewell with a noticeably more respectful demeanor. Though he didn't say it aloud, Samuel's handling of the situation had left an impression. As the three men exited the showroom, Jordan turned to Samuel. "Samuel, you're not just a great businessman, you're a teacher. The way you handled that situation is something everyone should learn from." Samuel chuckled softly, his eyes reflecting calm wisdom. "I only did what needed to be done, Jordan. Change doesn't come from anger. It comes from living true to your values, no matter the circumstance." Lennox remained quiet, but in his heart, he felt the weight of the lesson his father had imparted. It wasn't anger, but patience and self-respect that could dismantle prejudice and reveal true strength. Outside the showroom, Samuel Ito, Lennox, and Jordan Blake stood talking under the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. Samuel held the brochure in his hand, his eyes gazing into the distance as though weighing his next steps. Lennox, standing beside him, felt a calmness settle over his heart after the events of the day. "Dad," Lennox said, his voice filled with admiration, "today I realize that your composure is more powerful than any reaction could ever be." Samuel smiled, but before he could respond, Greg Thornton's voice called out from behind them. "Mr. Ito!" The three men turned. Greg was approaching, his gait no longer hesitant, but carrying a subtle air of arrogance. In his hand was a financial report. "I think you should review this document before considering any further transactions," Greg said, his tone laced with implication. "Buying an aircraft isn't just about money. It's about managing an entire operational system. I trust you understand." Samuel took the document, flipping through the pages with calm deliberation. Then he looked up, his voice warm but resolute. "I know exactly what I need to do, Greg, and I also know that my capabilities don't depend on your judgment." Lennox, despite his earlier restraint, couldn't hold back this time. His voice carried a sharp edge as he spoke. Why do you insist on looking down on my father? He's already proven he has the knowledge and ability to own a plane. What more do you want? Greg smirked, his smile filled with provocation. Mr. Lennox, this is business, not charity. Here, we deal in certainties, not promises. Jordan stepped forward, his gaze piercing. Greg, I think you've gone too far. Samuel doesn't need to prove anything to you. If you don't want to lose a client as valuable as him, I suggest you change your approach. Greg faltered, clearly not expecting Jordan, a respected businessman, to openly take Samuel's side. However, rather than back down, Greg turned to Samuel, attempting to maintain his composure. I'm simply doing my job. If Mr. Ito wishes to proceed, I'm more than happy to assist. But I hope he understands that my caution isn't meant as an insult. Samuel met Greg's gaze, his expression calm and steady. It was a look Lennox had always admired, one that exuded dignity without hostility. Samuel smiled faintly, speaking with quiet authority. Greg, caution is necessary, but it should never be used as an excuse for prejudice. I'll review the information you've provided, not because of what you've said, but because I know the path I need to take. Samuel's words left Greg momentarily speechless. With a curt nod, Greg turned and walked away, leaving the three men standing under the warm glow of the setting sun. Jordan chuckled softly, placing a hand on Samuel's shoulder. Samuel, you always know how to handle things in your own way. I've never met anyone quite like you. Samuel responded with a genuine smile. Jordan, change doesn't come from winning arguments. It comes from holding on to your values, no matter what others do. Lennox looked at his father, his chest swelling with pride. He spoke quietly, his voice tinged with awe. Dad, I think today we weren't just customers. We were trailblazers. Samuel placed a hand on Lennox's shoulder, his gaze filled with both kindness and resolve. You're right, Lennox. But remember, every journey requires faith. God has given us that faith, and we must keep walking, no matter how challenging the road may be. The sky shifted to a warm orange glow as the sun began to set. Samuel and Lennox left the showroom, carrying not just a brochure, but the conviction that no prejudice could stand in their way. Samuel Ito walked slowly through the showroom's display area, his eyes carefully taking in each meticulously designed aircraft. His calloused hands gently ran along the sleek body of a small silver plane, feeling the smooth, cold metal beneath his fingers. Beautiful, he murmured, almost to himself. Samuel couldn't help but dream of using such a plane to transport goods to remote areas. A vehicle like this could propel his small freight company beyond its current limits, connecting isolated communities and creating opportunities for those long forgotten. Standing beside him, Lennox held a brochure in his hand, his gaze shifting between the aircraft and his father. He could sense Samuel's pride and determination. Dad, this is a big step. Are you sure about this? Lennox asked, his voice filled with concern. Samuel turned to his son, a gentle smile spreading across his face. Yes, Lennox, I've dreamed of this day for a long time, and I know that if we don't dare to dream big, we'll stay in the same place forever. But Samuel's thoughts were interrupted by an unfamiliar voice behind them. Excuse me, but what are you doing here? Samuel and Lennox turned to see a young man in a crisp suit approaching them. It was Greg Thornton, a salesman from the showroom. The smile on Greg's face barely masked his arrogance, and his eyes swept over Samuel and Lennox, sizing them up. I'm looking at planes, Samuel replied calmly. I want to buy one. Greg chuckled softly, the mockery in his tone unmistakable. Crossing his arms, he tilted his head and said, Buying a plane? Really? I'm not sure your freight business could afford something like this. Lennox frowned, stepping forward. Dad, we don't have to listen to this, he said, his frustration evident in his voice. But Samuel gently placed a hand on his son's shoulder, holding him back. He shook his head lightly, his expression steady. Let them talk, Lennox. We know why we're here. Samuel's words silenced Lennox, but Greg, instead of stopping, continued his condescending remarks. I'm sure you'll find something more affordable elsewhere. We don't carry many models suited for customers like you. The air grew tense. Lennox clenched his fists, but Samuel maintained his composure. Fixing Greg with a calm yet commanding gaze, he said, "Greg, I'm here to find out what I need, not to listen to comments about things you don't understand." Samuel's words made Greg hesitate briefly. He didn't respond immediately, but instead smirked, as if refusing to take the statement seriously. Lennox looked at his father, his expression a mix of surprise and newfound respect. "Dad," Lennox whispered, "how can you stay so calm?" Samuel turned to his son, his eyes gentle but piercing. "Son, people can say whatever they want. What matters is that we know who we are and why we're here. Never let their words dictate your emotions." Though Samuel's wisdom eased the tension, Lennox couldn't shake his unease. Greg, still exuding arrogance, walked away but glanced back at them with a smug smile that seemed to dismiss their presence entirely. Samuel, however, paid no mind. He turned back to the silver plane, his eyes gleaming with quiet conviction. One day, he thought to himself, "This will be ours. Nothing will stand in the way of that." Samuel Ito and Lennox paused in front of the sleek silver plane, savoring a brief moment of calm before Greg Thornton disrupted it. Approaching with a folder in hand, Greg tried to maintain a professional facade, but his voice carried a thinly veiled condescension. "Mr. Ito," Greg began, flipping through the folder, "here's some information on the SRX 200, a very popular transport model, ideal for small businesses provided they can afford it." Lennox took a deep breath, fighting to keep his composure. He glanced at his father, concern flickering in his eyes. Samuel, in contrast, reached out and accepted the folder with a slight nod. "Thank you. I appreciate the information," Samuel said calmly. Greg raised an eyebrow, surprised by Samuel's measured response. But instead of stopping there, he pressed on. "I should clarify," Greg continued, "we have a strict deposit policy. To proceed with any transaction, you'll need to provide at least $500,000 upfront. I trust you understand that this is a mandatory requirement." Lennox could no longer stay silent. He stepped forward, his voice firm and brimming with frustration. "Are you questioning my father's ability? He built an entire company from nothing. A deposit like that is hardly an issue." Greg crossed his arms, a smug smirk spreading across his face. "It's not about doubt, Mr. Lennox. It's about prudence. We have to ensure our time isn't wasted. Surely you understand." Lennox clenched his fists, ready to fire back, but Samuel gently pulled him back with a firm hand on his arm. "Calm down, Lennox," Samuel said quietly. "Don't let their words dictate your actions." Turning back to Greg, Samuel met his gaze with unshakable poise. His voice remained steady, carrying an undercurrent of quiet authority. "I understand your policies, and I respect them, but I also know why I'm here. I don't need to convince anyone of my abilities. What matters to me is the true value of this aircraft and whether it aligns with my goals." Samuel's words caused Greg to falter for a moment, caught off guard by the wisdom and resolve from someone he had underestimated. "Very well, Mr. Ito," Greg replied, his tone tinged with an awkward formality. "If you need any additional information, I'll be happy to provide it." Samuel nodded, his expression calm and unwavering. "I'll be in touch if necessary." "Thank you." As the interaction concluded, Lennox looked at his father with a newfound admiration. The initial sense of helplessness he'd felt had been replaced with respect. Despite Greg's persistent arrogance, Samuel refused to be drawn into any cycle of insult or anger. Instead, his patience and steadiness allowed him to rise above it all. "Dad, why didn't you just call him out?" Lennox asked as the two walked away from the display area. "He was clearly trying to insult us?" Samuel smiled, giving Lennox's shoulder a reassuring pat. "Lennox, it doesn't matter what others say. What matters is that we know who we are. If you let your emotions take control, you're giving them the power. Let your actions speak for you." Samuel's words gave Lennox pause. He realized that his father wasn't just teaching him how to run a business, but also how to maintain dignity and self-respect in the face of adversity. Behind them, Greg lingered in place, watching as Samuel and Lennox left. His expression wavered, a mix of confusion and unease. Though he wouldn't admit it, Something about Samuel's unshakable confidence had left an impression, a sense that this man was unlike any customer he'd encountered before. The atmosphere in the showroom grew heavier after Samuel and Greg's earlier exchange. Lennox tried to maintain his composure as he walked alongside his father to another display area, but frustration simmered within him. "Dad," Lennox said quietly, glancing back at Greg, "we don't have to tolerate that kind of talk. He clearly doesn't respect you." Samuel smiled gently, his eyes calm and steady like a tranquil lake. "Son, let them talk. Their words don't define who I am, nor can they derail our goals. What matters is that we know where we're going." Before Lennox could respond, Greg reappeared, this time with a smug smile that was impossible to miss. He stood in their path, holding a sales report in his hand, as if preparing for another confrontation. "Mr. Ito," Greg began, his voice laced with mockery, "I just reviewed our sales data. It seems we don't often see customers from small transport businesses like yours. In fact, I can't recall anyone in your line of work ever owning an SRX 200. Lennox could no longer hold back. He stepped forward, meeting Greg's gaze head-on, his voice sharp and resolute. "You're implying my father can't afford it, aren't you? Do you even realize that he built an entire company from nothing, with nothing but hard work and determination?" Greg let out a dismissive chuckle, waving a hand as if brushing Lennox's words aside. "Mr. Lennox, I'm not saying your father hasn't worked hard, but effort alone doesn't suffice in this industry. We're looking for clients with real influence and substantial resources. I'm just trying to save everyone's time." Lennox clenched his fists, his face flushed with anger. He was about to take another step closer, but Samuel raised a hand to stop him. Turning to his son, Samuel's gaze was firm yet understanding. "Lennox," Samuel said, his voice calm and steady, "we don't need to argue with people who don't see our worth. Let me handle this." Samuel turned to face Greg, taking a deliberate step forward. His demeanor remained composed, but his gaze carried a quiet authority. "Greg," Samuel began, "I don't need your approval to know what I'm capable of. If you think prejudice can determine who's a good customer, then you're limiting your own potential." Greg faltered, momentarily caught off guard by Samuel's dignified response. But instead of conceding, he shrugged and smirked. "Mr. Ito, I'm simply doing my job. If you feel insulted, that was not my intention." Lennox felt a renewed surge of anger, but Samuel stayed calm, unshaken. He turned back to his son, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Son," Samuel said softly, "sometimes silence is the strongest response. They don't need to know what we're thinking. Our actions will speak louder than anything we could say." At that moment, a voice rang out from behind them. "Greg, I think you should reconsider how you treat customers." The three of them turned to see Jordan Blake, Samuel's old friend and a well-known businessman, approaching with a commanding presence. Jordan's sharp gaze landed on Greg, filled with quiet reproach. "Jordan," Samuel said with a warm smile, extending a hand. "It's good to see you here." Jordan shook his hand and turned to Greg, his tone firm and authoritative. "Greg, Mr. Ito isn't just another customer. He's one of the most visionary people I've ever met. If you can't recognize that, maybe this job isn't the right fit for you." Greg flushed a deep red, unable to find a response. Bowing his head slightly, he muttered a quick apology before retreating from the scene. Jordan placed a reassuring hand on Samuel's shoulder, a friendly smile spreading across his face. "Samuel, I've always admired the way you handle things. You don't just prove your worth. You do it with integrity and grace." Samuel chuckled lightly, his smile humble. "Thank you, Jordan. I'm just doing what I believe is right." Lennox looked at his father, his heart swelling with pride. Even in the most challenging moments, Samuel remained steadfast, embodying patience and dignity, qualities Lennox knew he needed to learn for himself. After the brief confrontation, Greg Thornton withdrew with a disgruntled expression. The tension in the showroom seemed to ease slightly, but Lennox still felt a lingering frustration. He turned to his father, his voice filled with concern. "Dad, if Jordan hadn't shown up when he did, I'm not sure how this would have turned out." Samuel looked at his son, his gaze both gentle and resolute. Son, Jordan helped in this moment, but in life, we can't always count on someone to step in. That's why you need to learn to stand firm in your beliefs and hold on to your dignity, no matter what others think. Lennox fell silent, mulling over his father's words. Jordan, standing nearby, offered a warm smile. He clapped Samuel on the shoulder and said, "Samuel, you didn't need anyone to defend you. The way you handled that situation spoke volumes. I was just here to remind Greg that arrogance never wins against integrity." Samuel returned the gesture with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Jordan, but I believe anyone can change if they come to understand the true value of respect." Jordan nodded, then suddenly added, "Samuel, I have an idea. If you're serious about buying this plane to expand your business, I can help. I know of some funding programs designed for small businesses looking to invest in transport technology. All you'd need is a solid plan, and I can connect you." Lennox looked at Jordan in surprise, admiration evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Jordan," he said. "Your support means a lot." Jordan chuckled, crossing his arms. "Don't thank me, Lennox. Your father inspired me from the very beginning. This is just my way of giving back." Samuel placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder, his voice steady and warm. "I'll consider your offer, Jordan, but I want to reach this goal on my own. Your help is something I deeply appreciate, but I believe every step forward is more meaningful when it's taken independently." Samuel's words left Jordan momentarily speechless. He studied his friend, and his smile grew more sincere. "You've always been like this, Samuel. That's why I'll always respect you." As they stepped out of the showroom, Lennox glanced at his father, his heart swelling with pride. "Dad, I don't think you need a plane to prove anything. The way you live and work is already a lesson in itself." Samuel smiled, his eyes lifting toward the sky. "Thank you, Lennox. But this plane isn't about proving anything. It's a tool, a way for us to bring greater good to more people. And that's worth striving for." As they left the showroom, the golden light of the setting sun illuminated the road ahead. Jordan waved goodbye from a distance, leaving father and son to continue their journey. Though unspoken, both Samuel and Lennox knew that today wasn't just about viewing a plane. It was another affirmation of the enduring value of patience, dignity, and integrity. Samuel Ito and Lennox remained standing before the sleek silver aircraft, Lennox's eyes betraying his simmering frustration at Greg Thornton's earlier derision. Samuel, as always, maintained his calm demeanor, his steady gaze reflecting the quiet determination that had long defined him. But just then, a familiar voice called out from the entrance. "Samuel, is that really you?" What an incredible surprise. Samuel turned, his expression softening into a warm smile as he recognized Jordan Blake, a long-lost friend he hadn't seen in years. Jordan, dressed in a sharp, expensive suit and exuding effortless confidence, strode toward him with a wide grin. "Jordan," Samuel exclaimed, his face lighting up. The two men closed the distance and embraced tightly, their reunion a moment of warmth in the sterile, polished surroundings of the showroom. The unexpected scene left Greg and the other showroom staff visibly stunned. Greg furrowed his brows, stepping closer with an incredulous look. "Mr. Blake, you know this man?" he asked, his tone tinged with disbelief. Jordan turned to face Greg, his expression shifting to one of firm seriousness. He placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder, his voice steady and assured. "Know him? Samuel is the man who helped me start my career. Without him, I wouldn't be where I am today." Jordan's words rang out like a thunderclap, cutting through the tension in the room. Greg hesitated, his gaze darting between Jordan and Samuel, his confusion and discomfort evident. Standing beside his father, Lennox was equally surprised. He turned to Samuel, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Dad, what's he talking about? You helped him get started?" Samuel offered a modest smile, but before he could reply, Jordan interjected. "Samuel was the one who lent me my first bit of capital to launch my business. More than that, he helped me secure my first clients. He's not just a friend. He's a mentor, someone who made me see my own potential when I couldn't." Jordan's voice was resolute, each word carrying weight that filled the room. Those listening couldn't help but reevaluate their perception of Samuel. Even Greg, who had only moments ago dismissed Samuel, now looked visibly uneasy. "Well, that's quite the story, Mr. Blake," Greg stammered, trying to regain composure. "But," Jordan cut him off, his tone sharp. "Greg, I think you need to reconsider how you treat customers. Samuel Ito is not someone you have the right to judge." Greg's face reddened, and he bowed his head slightly, muttering an apology. I didn't mean any disrespect. I was just trying to do my job." Samuel, ever composed, spoke with calm authority. "Greg, I don't need your approval to know my own worth. I came here not to prove anything, but to pursue a larger goal. If you can't see that, it's your limitation, not mine." Greg stood in stunned silence, unable to formulate a response. Samuel turned back to Jordan, his smile returning. "Thank you, Jordan, but I don't want this to turn into an argument. I came here to learn more about this plane, and I intend to do just that." Jordan nodded, placing a reassuring hand on Samuel's shoulder. "You're always the same, Samuel, focused on the goal. All right, let me help you. I'll make sure you get all the information you need." Samuel smiled in gratitude, while Lennox, standing quietly beside him, felt a swell of pride. This unexpected reunion with Jordan had not only shed light on Samuel's past, but also served as a vivid testament to the principles his father had lived by all his life. Under the bright showroom lights, the three of them moved toward the next display, leaving Greg and the contemplative gazes of the onlookers in their wake. Samuel Ito and Lennox walked toward the next display area, where another transport aircraft stood gleaming under the showroom lights. Jordan Blake led the way, exuding the confidence of a seasoned entrepreneur. Lennox couldn't hold back his curiosity any longer. "Mr. Blake," Lennox began, "did my father really help you start your career? He's never told me about this." Jordan stopped and turned, flashing a warm smile. "Call me Jordan Lennox. And yes, your father didn't just help me. He completely changed the trajectory of my life. It's a story I'll never forget." Samuel furrowed his brow slightly, though his eyes remained warm. "Jordan, there's no need to bring up the past. It doesn't matter now." Jordan laughed, placing a hand firmly on Samuel's shoulder. "It does matter, Samuel. What you did for me wasn't just about a loan or a few words of advice. You taught me how to believe in myself when no one else did. That's something worth remembering." Lennox leaned in, intrigued, as Jordan began to recount his story. "Back then, I was just a young guy trying to break into real estate. I had nothing but a business idea and an economics degree. Every bank turned me down, and my family told me I was chasing a pipe dream. But Samuel, he listened. He didn't just lend me the money I needed. He introduced me to the right people, taught me how to negotiate, and showed me how to spot opportunities. Because of him, I found success." Lennox turned to his father, his expression a mix of awe and pride. "You never told me this," Lennox said quietly. Samuel offered a modest smile, his eyes soft but resolute. "Son, what I did wasn't about recognition. It was about results. When you help someone, let the work speak for itself." From a distance, Greg Thornton observed the exchange, his expression hard to read. Unable to suppress his unease, he approached the group, clutching a folder in his hands. Despite his attempt at professionalism, his tone carried a trace of defensiveness. "Mr. Blake, I'm not questioning your relationship with Mr. Ito," Greg began cautiously. "But our showroom operates under strict policies. I hope you understand that verifying financial capability is standard procedure." Jordan turned toward Greg, his smile fading as his eyes sharpened. "Greg, let me remind you of something. Customers don't need to prove themselves to you. It's your job to prove your service is worthy of their trust." Greg flushed red but quickly retorted, "I'm simply following protocol. My intent was never to offend, just to ensure transparency." Samuel stepped forward, his calm but unwavering gaze fixed on Greg. "Greg, transparency is necessary, but it should never be used as a veil for prejudice. I know exactly what I'm doing here, and I don't need your assumptions to validate my purpose." Greg faltered, his eyes darting away. He couldn't meet Samuel's steady gaze, and an awkward silence followed. Jordan spoke again, his tone lighter to ease the tension. "Samuel, you don't need to prove anything further. But if you ever need support, I'm here. We could even collaborate to bring your vision to life." Samuel shook his head, his smile returning. "Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate your offer, but I want to see this through on my own. The support you've already shown means more than enough to me." Lennox looked at his father, his chest swelling with pride. He realized that Samuel wasn't just a devoted father, but a man of unwavering principles, always committed to independence and perseverance. Jordan grinned, nodding in admiration. "That's why I've always respected you, Samuel. You're not just someone who helps others. You're a living example of integrity and self-respect." Samuel placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder, his gratitude evident. "Thank you, Jordan. But don't forget, your success is the result of your own hard work. I simply showed you the door. You were the one who walked through it." Nearby, Greg remained silent, his earlier arrogance replaced by a contemplative expression. Jordan's story and Samuel's words had left a mark, not just on Greg, but on everyone within earshot. The room, once filled with skepticism, now brimmed with a newfound respect for Samuel Ito. The atmosphere in the showroom shifted entirely. Jordan's presence had not only eased the tension, but forced Greg Thornton and the other staff to view Samuel in a different light. Standing beside his father, Lennox still wrestled with frustration over how Greg had treated them, but Samuel's calm demeanor reminded him that his father's actions always carried a deeper purpose. Greg, though no longer daring to openly mock Samuel, still clung to his position. He approached with a stack of documents, setting them on the transaction desk. "Mr. Ito," Greg began, his tone restrained but still carrying a hint of condescension, "we always welcome potential customers. However, as I've mentioned, our showroom operates under strict financial policies. If you're serious about purchasing this aircraft, I'll need a more concrete commitment." Greg's probing gaze met Samuel's, but to his surprise, Samuel neither flinched nor grew defensive. Instead, he smiled faintly and stepped toward the desk with a composed demeanor. Lennox and Jordan exchanged a glance, unsure of what Samuel was about to do. Samuel placed a small leather briefcase on the desk. With deliberate precision, he opened it, revealing a neatly prepared check. Pulling it out, he handed it to Greg, the amount filled and matching the full value of the SRX-200 aircraft. Greg froze, his eyes widening as he processed the numbers on the check. For a moment, the air seemed to stand still. Samuel set the check firmly on the desk and spoke with calm certainty. "This is the payment I've prepared for the SRX-200. Now, can we proceed with finalizing the transaction?" Silence engulfed the showroom. Greg, visibly rattled, inspected the check as though expecting to find a flaw. But everything was in order, the amount, the signature, every detail flawless. Lennox stood motionless, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had no idea his father had planned such a bold move. Meanwhile, Jordan broke into a broad grin, clearly unsurprised. "Samuel," Jordan chuckled, pride evident in his voice, "you've always had a way of silencing doubt." Greg finally found his voice, though his usual arrogance was replaced by uncertainty. "Mr. Ito, I apologize if I've done anything to upset you earlier. I'll begin the necessary paperwork immediately to complete the transaction." Samuel nodded, his expression free of triumph or judgment. "Thank you, Greg. I hope that in the future, you'll treat all your customers with the respect they deserve." Greg nodded stiffly, unable to muster a response. Something within him seemed to shift, though he said nothing more. Lennox stepped closer to his father, his eyes filled with admiration. "Dad, I had no idea you were so prepared. How do you stay so calm when people keep underestimating you?" Samuel turned to his son, his voice gentle but firm. "Son, what they say doesn't matter. What matters is that you know who you are and why you're here. Never let small-minded words make you question your worth." Samuel's words struck a chord with Lennox, illuminating a lesson he had yet to fully grasp. He realized his father was teaching him not just about confidence, but about facing challenges with poise and decisive action. Jordan clapped Samuel on the shoulder, a radiant smile lighting his face. "Samuel, You always do things your way, and it's always the right way. I'm glad I got to see this moment. I know this aircraft will mark a new chapter for your company." Samuel smiled back, his eyes shimmering with hope. "Jordan, I'm not just buying an aircraft. I'm investing in opportunities to connect with more people and create greater value. That's always been my purpose." As the three of them moved toward the next steps, the sun dipped lower in the sky, its golden light streaming through the showroom windows. Behind them, Greg stood silent, reflecting on the lesson he had just witnessed. Meanwhile, Samuel, Lennox, and Jordan walked forward, their steps a testament to integrity, perseverance, and the power of unwavering resolve. The transaction was nearly complete. Samuel stood at the transaction counter, his expression calm, though his eyes gleamed with a quiet pride. Greg Thornton, no longer wearing his usual air of arrogance, was busy finalizing the paperwork. The showroom fell into a hushed silence, with everyone discreetly observing the proceedings. Lennox stepped closer to his father, his eyes brimming with admiration. "Dad," he began softly, "I've learned something today. There's no need to argue or defend yourself with words. If your actions are right, everything will reveal itself in time." Samuel nodded slightly, a gentle smile gracing his face. "Son, this world is full of judgments. But what you need to remember is to always hold on to your dignity. No one can take it from you unless you allow them to." As Greg returned, he handed over the finalized documents with a bow, his tone now marked by a newfound respect. "Mr. Ito, I've completed all the paperwork. The SRX 200 is officially yours. On behalf of the showroom, I apologize if anything was amiss earlier." Samuel regarded Greg, his gaze free of anger or resentment. He simply said, "Thank you. Your apology isn't for me, it's for yourself. I hope that from now on, you'll treat every customer with the respect they deserve." Greg remained silent, a contemplative look in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Jordan, who had been watching from nearby, broke into a wide grin. He stepped forward and clapped Samuel on the shoulder. "Samuel, you always have a way of doing things differently. I have to say, no one in this showroom will forget the lesson they learned today." Samuel smiled, responding with a firm handshake. "Jordan, thank you for being here. But I didn't do this to be remembered. I just wanted my actions today to lead to something better for others." Jordan nodded, his expression sincere with admiration. "That's exactly why I respect you so much, Samuel. Your humility and integrity have always been an inspiration to me." Standing beside his father, Lennox could sense that Jordan's words weren't empty flattery. He realized that his father wasn't just a skilled businessman. He was a man who lived and led by genuine values. Before parting ways, Jordan said, "Samuel, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I believe this is just the beginning of a new chapter for you." Samuel placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder, his eyes shining with steadfast belief. "Thank you, Jordan. I also believe the Lord always has a way of guiding us to where we're meant to be. This isn't just my success. It's part of a journey I'm fortunate to be on." Under the golden glow of the setting sun, Samuel and Lennox stepped out of the showroom. The SRX 200 was now officially theirs, but what Lennox carried home that day was far greater than a successful purchase. "Dad," Lennox said, his voice filled with emotion, "I don't think just anyone could handle things the way you do. But now I understand. Holding on to your dignity is what matters most." Samuel turned to his son, his gaze filled with love. "Lennox, dignity isn't something you take from others. It's how you live each day, no matter who's watching." In the distance, the SRX 200 gleamed under the sunset, a symbol of freedom and aspiration. With a soft smile on his face, Samuel whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for guiding the way." 1 week after the incident at the showroom, Samuel Ito and Lennox sat across from each other in Lennox's law office. Morning light streamed through the window, casting shimmering patterns on the dark wooden desk. In front of them lay a thick file, the culmination of days of meticulous preparation for the lawsuit. "Dad, I think we have enough evidence to take this to court," Lennox said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. I don't want anyone else to experience the injustice you did. Samuel nodded, his expression solemn, but exuding quiet confidence. Son, I agree. But we must do this not just to defend my honor, but to remind everyone that no one has the right to trample on another's dignity. Lennox picked up the file, his eyes reflecting determination. We'll make sure of that, Dad. I'll ensure justice is served. Later that day, the lawsuit was filed with the city court. The case quickly garnered media attention as news of a prestigious aircraft sales company being sued for discrimination spread like wildfire. Questions arose about the company's management practices and its history of behavior. The trial was scheduled for a Monday morning, drawing a large audience. Samuel walked into the courtroom with Lennox by his side, both maintaining a calm demeanor. Across the aisle, the aircraft company had deployed a team of high-profile attorneys to defend their case. Greg Thornton, who had directly confronted Samuel at the showroom, was also present. His face bore traces of tension, though he tried to appear composed. We will address and dismantle these baseless accusations, the company's attorney declared in their opening statement, their voice brimming with confidence. When Lennox took his turn, he adjusted his tie and began his presentation with clarity and conviction. Your Honor, Lennox started, his voice firm and resonant. This case is not just about a personal slight. It is a wake-up call to address systemic discrimination, behavior that none of us should tolerate. Lennox presented his initial evidence, detailed records of the company's hiring and training policies, which contained ambiguous provisions that could easily foster discriminatory practices. But his most impactful moment came when he introduced the recording Samuel had managed to capture at the showroom. And here, Lennox said, motioning toward the courtroom technician, are the words of an employee from this company, demonstrating a clear attitude of discrimination. As the recording played, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted dramatically. Greg's voice, dripping with sarcasm and condescension, echoed clearly. I don't think a small transport company like yours can afford a plane like this. The room buzzed with murmurs. Some people shook their heads in visible disapproval, their faces reflecting anger and disbelief. Lennox turned back to the judge, his voice resolute. Your Honor, this is not just a personal grievance. This is evidence of how a management system has allowed discriminatory behavior to persist unchecked. Samuel, seated quietly, observed his son with pride. His gaze was steady, his heart swelling as he watched Lennox stand firm in defense of justice and the family's honor. When the court adjourned for a recess, Lennox sat beside his father, leaning in to whisper, Dad, I believe we're on the right path. Samuel placed a reassuring hand on Lennox's shoulder, his eyes gentle. I believe so too, Lennox, and no matter the outcome, I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right. The courtroom fell silent as the judge returned, signaling the continuation of the trial. It was clear, however, that the momentum had shifted entirely. The trial resumed after the recess, and everyone in the courtroom listened intently to every unfolding moment. The atmosphere grew heavier as Lennox rose to present the next set of evidence. Samuel, seated beside him, watched his son with unwavering trust. Your Honor, Lennox began, his voice firm and resolute, we've already heard the incriminating audio recording. But we also have additional evidence proving that the discriminatory behavior at the showroom wasn't an isolated incident. It was the result of a management system that condoned such conduct. He opened a laptop on the desk and connected it to the courtroom's display screen. A series of internal documents filled the screen, ready to be reviewed. This is an internal report from last year, Lennox explained, pointing to the highlighted section. In this document, there is a clear directive encouraging sales staff to prioritize a specific customer demographic, those deemed aligned with the company's brand image. This includes criteria based on appearance, demeanor, and even the professions of potential buyers. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Some members of the audience turned to look at the company's legal team, while Greg Thornton, seated at the back, lowered his head in silence. Lennox continued, his voice growing more forceful with every word. On the surface, these criteria may appear harmless, but in practice, they created an invisible barrier for customers who didn't fit the ideal profile. This led to actions like those of Greg Thornton at the showroom. as heard in the recording presented earlier. The company's lead attorney stood, attempting to counter Lennox's argument. Your Honor, these documents do not conclusively prove that our company engaged in systemic discrimination. They are merely guidelines intended to optimize business strategy. Lennox turned to face the attorney, his gaze piercing. Sir, let me ask you this. Does optimizing business strategy justify excluding entire groups of customers based on prejudice? Is your company willing to take responsibility for fostering an environment where actions like those of Greg Thornton were not only tolerated but normalized? The attorney fell silent, unable to provide a satisfactory answer. Lennox addressed the judge again, his tone resolute. Your Honor, this case is not just about my family. It is about holding a powerful business accountable for the way it wields its influence. If we fail to draw the line here, such behavior will persist, harming not just customers but the values we claim to uphold. The judge nodded, taking detailed notes. She requested a response from the company's legal team, but it was clear they were running out of arguments. Greg sat quietly in the back, his eyes darting nervously as Lennox's evidence and logic dismantled the company's defenses. When Lennox finished his presentation, Samuel turned to him, a proud smile lighting up his face. You did an excellent job, Lennox. I never doubted you. Lennox nodded, though he knew it was his father's quiet strength that inspired him to stand firm in court. The session concluded for the day, leaving the courtroom abuzz with murmurs of agreement. The media quickly picked up the story, and news of Samuel Ito, a man fighting back against discrimination, spread like wildfire. As Samuel and Lennox exited the courthouse, a young reporter approached them with a microphone. Mr. Ito, she asked, do you have a message for others who've endured injustice like you? Samuel paused, looking directly into the camera lens. His voice was steady, each word carrying weight. I want to say this, justice doesn't come from waiting. It comes from action. Never be afraid to stand up for what is right. And always remember, everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are. His words left a hush over the gathered crowd. Lennox stood beside his father, feeling the gravity of the moment. He realized they weren't just fighting for themselves. They were giving a voice to those who couldn't speak up. The courtroom fell silent as the judge entered to deliver the final verdict. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every gaze fixed on her as they awaited her words. The judge held the case file, flipping through its pages deliberately. She looked up, her stern eyes scanning the room before she began. After thoroughly reviewing the evidence, including audio recordings and internal documents, this court finds that the aircraft company has violated civil rights laws by engaging in systematic discriminatory practices against its customers. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some turned to glance at the company's representatives, while Greg Thornton, seated near the back, bowed his head, his face pale. The judge continued, her voice firm and authoritative. The company is ordered to pay $500,000 in damages to Mr. Samuel Ito for the harm caused to his dignity and mental well-being. Additionally, the court mandates that the company implement internal reforms to eliminate discriminatory practices moving forward. Light applause broke out in the courtroom, a gesture of quiet triumph and solidarity. Sitting beside Lennox, Samuel displayed no exuberant celebration. Instead, he offered a modest smile, nodding slightly, as though the outcome was what he had quietly anticipated. The company's legal team appeared visibly disheartened. One of their lawyers rose to request a reduction in the compensation, but the judge dismissed the appeal decisively. This court will not tolerate any acts of discrimination. This serves as a necessary lesson for everyone to understand that fairness and equality are non-negotiable. Samuel rose, adjusted his modest suit, and turned to look at Greg Thornton, now stripped of the arrogance he had once worn like armor. Samuel gave him a small nod, a silent gesture of forgiveness that spoke louder than words. As Samuel and Lennox left the courtroom, they were surrounded by reporters and supporters eager to express their admiration. But Samuel simply raised a hand in acknowledgement and walked away with Lennox, leaving their story to echo in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. During the drive home, father and son sat in reflective silence. Samuel gazed out the car window, his eyes distant, perhaps retracing the journey that had led them here. Lennox, in the driver's seat, finally broke the quiet. "Dad, do you think things will really change after today?" Samuel turned to him, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Son, not everything changes overnight, but every small action makes a difference. Today, we laid another brick in the wall of justice, and I believe others with courage, like you, will lay the next ones." Lennox smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed deep emotion. "Thank you, Dad. I don't know if I could have stood firm like that without you." Samuel placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice gentle yet steady. "No, Lennox, you did this on your own. I was just here to remind you that we never walk alone. God always guides those who stand up for what's right." They stopped at a small roadside cafe. Sitting at a simple wooden table, Samuel looked across at Lennox, as though committing this moment to memory. "Son," Samuel began, his deep voice imbued with warmth, "I want you to remember this. Justice isn't about winning a trial. It's about the willingness to fight for what's right, regardless of the outcome. And today, you did just that." Lennox remained quiet, absorbing every word. He realized their story didn't end in the courtroom. It would live on in how they carried themselves and what they stood for each day. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of warm amber, the two of them stepped out of the cafe. The evening light stretched across the road ahead, illuminating their path. Samuel whispered, almost like a prayer, "Thank you, Lord, for giving us strength. And thank you, Lennox, for being my greatest pride." Walking side by side, Samuel and Lennox carried with them hope and determination. In the distance, an aircraft descended into the sky, leaving a trail against the fading light, a symbol of freedom and ambition, and the promise of what lay ahead. Under a clear blue sky, with the sun shining brightly, Samuel Ito returned to the airplane showroom where it had all begun. This time, however, he walked in not with hesitation or the weight of judgmental gazes, but with quiet confidence, the demeanor of a man who had faced challenges head-on and emerged victorious. The silver SRX 200 sat on the tarmac, gleaming under the sunlight. Technicians and staff bustled around, preparing for its maiden flight under Samuel's ownership. A few familiar faces, including Greg Thornton, stood silently in the background, watching. The air shifted palpably with Samuel's arrival. There was no longer condescension or ridicule. Instead, there was a subdued respect, tinged with embarrassment. Greg hesitated for a moment before approaching. His posture lacked the arrogance it once held, and his voice carried an uncharacteristic humility. "Mr. Ito," Greg began, his words faltering, "I'd like to apologize for how I treated you before. I was wrong." Samuel turned to face Greg, a faint smile on his lips. Placing a steady hand on Greg's shoulder, his voice was calm yet resolute. "Greg, I don't need your apology to understand my worth. But I hope you've realized that no one deserves to be judged by appearances alone. Everyone has the right to dream, and everyone deserves respect." Greg was silent, his head bowed slightly, as if truly reflecting on Samuel's words. Samuel, seeing no need to linger, turned and climbed the steps leading into the plane. Lennox, standing nearby, observed the interaction with pride. He knew his father hadn't just won a court case, he had triumphed over long-held prejudices. Inside the cockpit, Samuel stood by the large window, gazing out at the runway below with quiet introspection. Lennox followed, settling into the co-pilot's seat with a grin. "Dad, how does it feel to finally live your dream?" he asked. Samuel's smile broadened, and his eyes sparkled with a deep satisfaction. "Lennox, this isn't just my dream. It's a reminder that anyone can achieve what they set their mind to, as long as they never give up and always trust in God's guidance." Outside, the SRX 200 roared to life. The powerful hum of its engines filled the air, signaling the start of a new journey. Greg and the other showroom staff watched silently, some bowing their heads as though contemplating the events that had transpired. Samuel picked up the plane's intercom microphone, his voice resonating throughout the cabin. "Fasten your seatbelts. We're about to take flight." The plane began to taxi down the runway before lifting gracefully into the sky. Samuel gazed out the window, his eyes fixed on the vast, open horizon. From this height, the world below seemed smaller, quieter, and more peaceful. In that moment, he whispered a prayer of gratitude for the strength to endure and overcome. Seated beside him, Lennox spoke softly. "Dad, I think it's not just me who's learned from you. Even those who doubted and dismissed you have realized something important." Samuel nodded, his voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes we don't need to force anyone to change. By staying true to our values, we show others the way." The plane soared higher, cutting through a sea of pristine white clouds, a symbol of freedom and ambition. On the ground below, Greg and the showroom team continued to watch, their faces thoughtful and subdued. Before leaving the showroom earlier, Samuel had left a message at the front desk. It was short but carried profound meaning. Never judge a person by their appearance. Everyone has the right to dream, and everyone deserves respect. This message wasn't just for Greg or the showroom staff. It was for everyone who had ever faced prejudice or injustice. It was a reminder that patience and dignity are the most powerful tools for overcoming any barrier. The story ended with the SRX-200 disappearing into the horizon, carrying Samuel's dreams and his unwavering message of fairness and compassion. A new journey had begun, not just for Samuel, but for everyone who dared to stand up for what was right. Samuel Ito's story is a poignant lesson on confronting prejudice and upholding personal dignity. In today's world, we often encounter similar challenges in our work, studies, or relationships. Let us remember that a person's worth is not defined by their appearance or circumstances, but by how they live and treat others. Never hesitate to stand against injustice, but do so with grace and integrity. Most importantly, believe in yourself and never abandon your dreams. Think the story ends here? Don't leave just yet. There are plenty more inspiring stories waiting for you on this channel. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated.